Put down! Put down! Put down! Put down! Put down! Get Tony type for the governor, quick!
As dawn broke over Lang Close, Marcus Monzo walked with a chilling purpose, a long blade gripped tightly in his hand, ready to unleash violence without warning. Residents watched from behind curtains as he moved past parked cars and low brick walls. His steps were steady, deliberate. On the pavement, 14-year-old Daniel Angerin lay motionless. Minutes earlier, he'd been walking to school, unaware of the danger approaching. Emergency calls began almost immediately. Voices on the line sounded confused, some struggling to find the words. A person with a sword, a child injured. Police and paramedics raced through the narrow streets as neighbours tried to keep their distance. In the space of a few minutes, a quiet London neighbourhood had become the scene of a fatal attack. A family's life had changed forever, and the community was left searching for answers. Daniel Angerin was 14 years old. He lived with his family in Hainault, a suburban neighbourhood in northeast London. The area is known for its quiet streets lined with rows of brick houses, small parks, and a sense of familiarity among neighbours. Families often settle here for the schools, as it is seen as a safe place for raising children. Daniel attended Bancroft School in Woodford Green, where teachers described him as a bright and hard-working student. He enjoyed football, liked science lessons, and was known for his calm, polite manner. Friends remembered him as someone who included others, a boy who seemed comfortable with himself and eager to learn. At home, Daniel was part of a close-knit family who valued education, faith, and community. The wider Hainault community is diverse, with families who have lived there for generations and others who have arrived more recently. Residents often say it is a place where people look out for each other, where it is common to recognise faces at the local shops and greet neighbours by name. It is not an area frequently associated with serious crime. Marcus Aurelio Arduini Monzo was born in April 1988 in a rural part of Brazil. His upbringing combined influences from his Brazilian father and his Spanish mother, and early in life he was seen as a gentle, sociable young man. Those who knew him described a person who valued fitness and discipline. He eventually left Brazil behind, moving to the United Kingdom in 2013 in search of better opportunities. Settling in East London, Monzo took on a variety of jobs over the years, from working in a pub to delivering packages as an Amazon driver. For a time, he blended into the rhythms of ordinary life, showing no clear signs that anything was amiss. Outside of work, Monzo developed a passion for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Friends recalled that he was devoted to the sport, relishing the focus and sense of community it offered. But by the early 2020s, something began to change. He gradually pulled away from social circles and became increasingly isolated. Those who had once seen him as easygoing started to notice troubling shifts in his mindset. Monzo grew absorbed by conspiracy theories and fringe beliefs. He spoke obsessively about hidden forces controlling the world, insisting that governments were lying about the pandemic, that alien entities were manipulating humanity, and that the Pope was secretly evil. His worldview became a patchwork of paranoia, spirituality, and distorted logic. He embraced ideas that the earth was flat and that he alone could see the truths that others refused to accept. Alongside this deepening fixation with conspiracies, he experimented heavily with psychedelic drugs. He believed they were a gateway to a higher consciousness and spiritual awakening. Instead, they fed a spiral of delusion. By 2023, friends described him as profoundly withdrawn. He began carrying an old-style mobile phone, sometimes behaving erratically in public. People who had once trained with him in martial arts recounted that he seemed distant and distracted, prone to sudden rants about cosmic plots. As his mental state deteriorated, Monzo's behaviour became more bizarre and disturbing. At one point, he killed his own cat, convinced he was somehow connected to negative energies. He reportedly kept the remains in his van, By then he had fully retreated into an inward world of hallucination and fear, convinced he was locked in some metaphysical battle. Yet, to those passing him on the street, he still appeared outwardly unremarkable, a delivery driver in his mid-30s, just another man trying to get by in London. Few could have imagined the turmoil building in his eyes. He had become convinced that violence might be necessary to fulfill a purpose only he could comprehend. In the months before the crime, he was effectively cut off from meaningful support. His family lived abroad, and whatever fragile links he maintained with friends had all but frayed. Alone in his flat, Monzo's beliefs calcified into dangerous certainty. Every day he sank deeper into a labyrinth of delusion, paranoia, and self-justification. Nothing in his early years predicted what was coming, but by the spring of 2024, Marcus Monzo was no longer the man he had been. Just after 6 o'clock on the morning of April 30th, 2024, an ordinary London street became the stage for something almost unimaginable. Around 6 a.m, Marcus Monzo left his home in Newham. He drove a white van into Hainault, the sword already in his possession. Witnesses would later describe his face as vacant, calm in a way that felt more like absence than composure. At precisely 6:11 a.m, Monzo mounted the curb on Langclose, driving straight into a 33-year-old man on his way to work. The impact crushed the man against a garden wall. Neighbours were jolted awake by the sound of screaming.
I saw this guy and he just randomly hit me with a van. But I kind of saved myself. I didn't panic straight away. I survived.
Moments later, Monzo climbed out of the van gripping a long samurai sword. He began stabbing the injured man where he lay. Emergency calls flooded in. Some residents described a man calmly walking through the street, blade in hand. Others said he moved like someone possessed, drifting between lucidity and rage. Around 6:13 a.m, Monzo forced his way into a nearby house. Inside, a mother and her 2 children were getting ready for the day. Without warning, he attacked the woman, slashing her arms and body. When her daughter tried to run, he struck her too, leaving deep cuts across her arm. One child managed to escape upstairs and hid as their home was transformed into a nightmare. By 6:18, Monzo had returned to the street. The air was thick with confusion and terror. Neighbours peered from behind curtains, uncertain whether to hide or to help. At 6:20 a.m, Monzo encountered 14-year-old Daniel Angerine walking to school. He attacked without hesitation, cutting Daniel down on the pavement. The boy collapsed, bleeding into the morning fog. Within minutes, around 6:23 a.m, the first police units arrived. Emergency vehicles blocked portions of Langclose, casting an eerie blue and red glow across front gardens and brick facades. Officers stepped out to a scene that felt almost unreal, a quiet neighbourhood suddenly transformed by violence. They spotted Marcus still on the street, the sword glinting in his hand. The priority was to contain him, to prevent any further bloodshed. Officers spread out carefully, maintaining distance, weapons drawn. Again and again they called out, their voices echoing against the rows of terraced houses. For several long minutes, Monzo barely responded. He stared past them, seemingly unmoored from reality. Meanwhile, paramedics crouched over Daniel, working desperately to save his life. He had been found gravely wounded on the pavement, his school uniform stained red. They fought to stabilize him as quickly as possible, but despite their best efforts, Daniel's injuries were too severe. He was pronounced dead soon after. As police closed in, Monzo suddenly lunged at 2 unarmed officers. A female officer was slashed across the arm, the blade severing tendons. Another officer was struck on the hand as he tried to protect his colleague. The tension spiked. Armed officers deployed a taser. The weapon crackled as it struck Monzo, but even then, he struggled to stay upright, fighting against the shock. more officers rushed forward with shields, driving him backward inch by inch. At approximately 6:33 am, after what felt like an endless standoff, Monzo's body finally slackened. He dropped the sword onto the street. Police surged forward, pinning him to the ground. In that instant, the immediate threat ended. The arrest marked the close of the violence, but the beginning of something else, a maze of grief, disbelief, and investigation. Police placed Marcus under arrest on suspicion of murder and multiple counts of attempted murder. In the hours that followed, he was transported to an East London police station under tight security. Detectives began urgent interviews seeking any explanation for the morning's chaos. Forensic teams secured Langclose, combing the street, the van, and nearby properties for evidence. The sword was recovered along with the distinctive clothing Marcus had been wearing during the attack. Meanwhile, investigators began assembling a detailed profile of the man whose actions had shattered a community's sense of safety. In custody, Marcus underwent psychiatric evaluations to assess his state of mind. Officers and mental health professionals noted signs of delusion and erratic thinking, consistent with reports of his growing paranoia before the incident. However, prosecutors argued that his psychosis was self-induced by prolonged drug use, making him criminally responsible for his actions. As the investigation progressed, charges were formally brought against him, including the murder of 14-year-old Daniel Angerin, multiple counts of attempted murder, grievous bodily harm, aggravated burglary, and possession of an offensive weapon. The case was transferred to the Old Bailey, London's Central Criminal Court, reflecting its seriousness and public impact. Throughout pre-trial hearings, Marcus appeared withdrawn and disconnected, rarely making eye contact with the court. Defense counsel argued that he had been suffering from a severe mental disorder influenced by his history of psychedelic drug use, spiritual obsession, and deepening isolation. They claimed that at the time of the attack, he was in a state of psychosis that distorted his grasp of reality. But prosecutors maintained that Monzo had made deliberate choices leading up to the violence, including arming himself and driving to the scene. They argued that he was aware of his actions and their likely consequences, even if he was profoundly disturbed. In the end, the jury found Marcus Monzo guilty of all major charges, including the murder of Daniel and the attempted murder of several others. The judge described the murders as brutal and entirely unprovoked, emphasizing the impact on victims, families, and the wider community. Marcus was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 40 years before parole eligibility. The court acknowledged his mental health issues but concluded that they did not absolve him of responsibility. After sentencing, community leaders reiterated their condolences to the Angerin family and all those affected. For many, the conviction brought a measure of closure, though no punishment could reverse the harm inflicted. Marcus Monzo was transferred to a high-security prison, where he remains under close supervision. A man whose descent into delusion and violence will haunt all who remember that horrific morning in Hainault. Community leaders and local officials expressed deep sorrow over the tragedy that unfolded in Hainault. In the days that followed, the neighbourhood came together in shared grief. Flowers, candles, and handwritten messages appeared near the site of the attack, creating an informal memorial for Daniel Angerin. The case also raised broader questions about how mental health systems can better identify and manage potential risks. Marcus's history included documented struggles, though many details remain undisclosed. The tragedy has sparked conversation about how communities, professionals, and authorities might improve early intervention and support. What measures can be taken to improve public safety while ensuring people receive proper care? How can warning signs be recognized before a crisis unfolds? And what role do all of us play in looking out for one another? If you found this case compelling, consider subscribing for more in-depth true crime stories. Your support helps us continue sharing these important stories weekly.